Things are falling apart already up here. Where's my stress level? Happy Saturday. How's everybody doing? Is this the last day? Everybody get to go home after this for a while? Excellent. So between now and when we wrap up at about 10 minutes till 10, you can see the topic, thriving in interesting times. And hope we have a little bit of fun and an exercise or two along the way, because I would like this to be practical and so that you have a takeaway with you when you leave here and I'll go back home. And, whether it's a wish or a curse, ancient Chinese proverb, right? May you live in interesting times. And I think the information that Scott just shared just amplifies some of the very interesting times that we all live in today. But you could hear it referred to as interesting times, but that's not typically what we're hearing. We're hearing these words, frustrated, overwhelmed, uncertain, demotivated, unsatisfied, volatile, chaotic. It's like you don't know what's coming next or maybe even how to respond to it. And this uncertainty really can get the best of us, even people that have a lot of experience with it. Take a look at this video clip from Donald Rumsfeld, who is giving a press conference and saying a couple things about the not finding weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
There are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know know.
And that pretty much sums it up. There are things that we know, and when you talk about uncertainty, which is one of the big things that drives a lot of stress for us and can increase the risk of burnout, when we think about what it is that we know, how much of that gets hardwired into our thinking? And for us as humans in our human experience, we know that, for example, however the past has occurred, if we see box, circle, box, circle, box, circle, we think that it's going to be box, circle, box, circle, box, circle going into the future. And yet the reality is things change all the time, but we get caught in the way that it used to be and sometimes long for what has happened in the past. And when things are changing in the moment, we may not be incredibly comfortable with that. To give you an idea just how tightly ingrained this is for us, I want to show you yet another video clip. This is a video clip of Bobby McFerrin. Anybody remember Bobby McFerrin? Don't worry, be happy. So he's presenting at an international science festival several years ago, and he demonstrates this exact pattern of hardwired behavior in a really unique way. Take a look, play along if you'd like.
Talking about expectations. Watch. Okay.
Never heard that third note, but away it went, right? Sort of interesting. I mean, we get caught in this, right? We're so used to the way things have been occurring for years that when something comes up in terms of change, it catches us off guard. It makes us really uncomfortable. And that is really true also whenever we're not sure what to do next. There have been many industries, many companies, many organizations, many professions that have faced this over the years. I've put just a few of them up here on the screen. And if you take a look down the left-hand side, any of these companies look familiar to you? What we know them for today, though, is not the original business that they were in. So let's just do a little matching for a moment. I have a question. Does anybody know, without looking it up on Google, what was the original business that Gucci was in? Off of that list on the right-hand side. Saddles. Yeah, it's exactly what their original business was, saddles. Now imagine if Gucci would have never changed. If Gucci would have just said, we're just going to keep on making really great saddles for the rest of our life, I wonder if Gucci would still be around today. How about Nokia? Does anybody know what Nokia's original business was? Say it again. It was not rice cookers. That's a really good guess, though. It was rubber boots. Who would have ever thought that, right? I mean, what do we know Nokia for now? Sony. What do you now here? What was Sony's one of Sony's original products? Rice cookers. Yeah. Sony's back before they were known as Sony. Sony's two primary products were rice cookers and a transistor radio that worked better than anything that we had built here in America. Unfortunately, their rice cookers were not very good quality. They had a pretty clear history of shorting out, catching fire, burning people's houses down. Sony's gotten a little bit better over time. You know, the story here is one of, imagine if any of these companies would have said, we don't care if the world's changing, somebody's always going to need what we have, exactly the way that we have it today. What if we never thought about changing the way that we do things or the way that we operate? And that, unfortunately, is what ends up happening in uncertainty. Has anybody been to Blockbuster Video lately? Like, there's only one left, right? And it's about to close, I think. You know, I mean, Blockbuster Video. Now, look at this. Now, who is the biggest threat to Blockbuster Video? Netflix, right? And so back in 2008, right, Netflix is still, you know, it's not really taken off. But, you know, they moved from the mail order business into starting to think about what's happening with streaming, you know, and, you know, they were having a little bit of difficulty. And so at any rate, Mark Randolph and Reed Hastings from Netflix went to Blockbuster to the CEO, John Aniocco, in 2008, and they said, would you like to buy us? And Aniocco said, no, thank you. And Aniocco was known to say, and it's out in the public domain, he said, you know, this Netflix thing, it's a flash in the pan. Nobody's ever going to want to stream video into their home. He said, what people really want to do is they want to go down to the store, browse the new release wall, and read the blurb on the back of the box. That's exactly what you want to do in February, is load 6 screaming kids into the family truckster with 6 inches of snow on the ground and go down to Blockbuster and browse the new release wall. You know, Aniocco told Netflix, no thank you. We don't want anything to do with you. We will drive you out of business on our own. Who drove who out of business? You know, and you know, the inability to remain relevant in the eyes of the consumer and what the consumer wanted in the face of that uncertainty has done more than one company in. Borders Bookstore, same thing. Massively declining sales in their bookstores. And yet George Jones says, that's okay, we'll just build more bookstores bigger than we've ever built them before, even though we're not selling as many books as we used to. Borders was so sure about the brick and mortar store business that they outsourced their electronic book ordering to Amazon. You know, and you know, it's what we get caught in with this sense of uncertainty, right? And we think that it is incredibly stress-inducing. The reality is this: it is not uncertainty that does us in; it is certainty. It is the certainty that we know that exactly what happened yesterday, box circle, box circle, box circle, is exactly what's going to happen tomorrow, and we bet the farm on that. Right? It is the uncertainty of the certainty of how patients will always come to us in healthcare and in medicine that will do us in, not the uncertainty of how do we respond to those challenges. You know, the research is really, really clear on these points, and you can see it up on the screen, is that, you know, oftentimes what ends up happening, you know, with the very best of intentions, as we say, it's a rough and rocky road. You know, and we're just riding that raft, and we're trying to get to the next thing. We're waiting for the waters to calm. And, you know, all those around us, we want to make sure that they're just able to continue their work. And so we do this really cool thing. We go over and we're like, don't worry about it. It's going to be okay. You know, we'll get through this, and, you know, the waters will be calm. And people can read through that. You know, when we're not sure ourselves, people can read through that. If people think that we are not being genuine, if we are not being transparent, people will read through that, and that impacts the way that they work. It impacts the way that they engage. It increases cynicism and so on. But imagine going out and saying, hey, the healthcare system is changing, or the way that we, run the office is changing, or the way that we see patients is changing. And I'm not exactly sure how we want to get there, but I know we're really smart people and we can do that if we work together. Look at what happens with performance. People are like, okay, I can be in on that. Create maybe something new, find a new way, no longer be a John Deere and being a blacksmith, but turning over and recognizing the fact that the nature of farming is changing, and I'm not going to have a blacksmith business very long. I ought to start to think about mechanized kind of equipment. Look at what happens with the cynicism. It goes down. Commitment to the organization through the roof. Alignment with where it is that we're trying to go. Everybody starts rowing more clearly in the same direction. And job satisfaction and that joy that you heard Scott talking about starts to go up. The message here is, and I'm never going to claim that it's easy, but the message here is that is to do what you can to minimize the fact that it is the uncertainty that is around us in healthcare these days. And see what you can do to embrace that, to be able to create a new way. That is a really important part of remaining resilient in healthcare. The second message that I have for you today is around one of the biggest things that causes stress for people in healthcare, which is workload itself. And no big secrets here, but everybody in this room is juggling a hefty workload. Clinical workload, administrative workload, it doesn't matter. You can see 56% of clinicians are reporting being under significantly more pressure. 54% of physicians, according to the most recent survey year that we can get data, which is 2014, are reporting significant levels of burnout. And when it comes to physicians who also have leadership roles, trying to juggle those clinical and administrative responsibilities just adds another layer of stress. And so this morning, what I would love to do to be able to be helpful, to be able to help bolster resilience, is to take us through a little bit of an exercise where we can help you to understand, how do you actually prioritize your workload? How many of you do things every single day that you're like, why do we do this? I think it's all of us. And what the research really shows is that about 41% of our work that we do every day adds no value to anybody. It's not required from a regulatory perspective. And we just often do it because we're still caught in that box, circle. Have you seen the research that has come out recently that was published? I think I read it about 2 weeks ago, which is that it's not hard, and this is what the research said, it's not hard to get a physician to start doing something new, but it's almost impossible to stop a physician from doing something they've been doing for years. And it's like a piling on effect, right? We put something on, but we don't take something off. So let's do a little exercise around that. I would like you to think, right? And you picked up a copy of some materials on the way in, and I'm only going to take about 4 or 5 minutes to ask you to make a list of everything that you can think of to do, that you have to do in the next 30 days, just at work, not at home. Right? All the little meetings and everything that you need to do. If you would just do me a favor, I'll give you just about 5 minutes to do this. I want you to make as many things or write as many things down on that list as you can in the next about 4 or 5 minutes. I want to help you to strategize how to prioritize. Every little thing, no matter how insignificant it may seem. Reports, meetings. All right, so let's go with what we have on our list at the moment. And so now we all have things to do, right? And some of them are administrative, some of them are clinical, and so forth. You know, the question is, there's so much. Like, how many of you go home exhausted at the end of the day, knowing that you barely had time to maybe grab a bite to eat or take a decent bio break, and yet you're exhausted? Like, you don't feel like doing anything, right? You know, I mean, that's most of us, right? And so the intent here, by doing this exercise and by thinking about the more intentionally the work that we're actually doing, is to help put some joy and intent and purpose back into the work that everybody in this room does. And so, you know, this really comes down to, how do you prioritize work? Because everybody says, work smarter, not harder. But whoever tells us how to work smarter and not harder? This is the work smarter, not harder approach. You know, and it begins by thinking about, how do we actually prioritize our work? And what you see up on the screen are 4 ways that most people tend to prioritize the work they do. It's the work that's most familiar. It's the stuff that fits in box, circle, box, circle, box, circle. It's the stuff I know how to do. I've been doing it forever, right? It's the most high-profile work. I went to a meeting, or I got an email, or somebody's screaming for something. You know, it's the thing that's getting the most attention that is what we prioritize. It's most urgent. What has a deadline that is looming? Or the most recent work. You know, the stuff that, you know, was just assigned at that most recent meeting. Now look in that gray box at the bottom. What's missing? The stuff that's most energizing and what's most important. And so this really begins by thinking about, if you think, I asked you to make a list of work in the next 30 days. If you think about what are the priorities for the next 30 days, that's a really good way to start to think about, how do I manage this to-do list? How do I think about what it is that I'm doing every day? And so how do you set priorities? You see them down here in the lower right-hand box. What constitutes a priority? Directly supports some strategic initiative or some business need, right? It's top of license. It's something that has to be done by you at your level of the organization, right? Or your level of your practice. And it can be significantly advanced and make progress toward within the next month. Okay, so in order to be a priority, it's got to hit all three of those criteria. Now, we advocate and say, stick to three main priorities, over the coming month, because in our human existence, right, we can't stretch beyond having about 6 priorities, and we want to leave some wiggle room for that inevitable emergency that starts to crop up. There's a lot of stuff that can land on our table and for our book of business, but it's just not going to be addressed in the next 30 days. And the goal is to get that out of our mind. And so I would like you to think about on that same worksheet at the bottom of the page and write out, what are the 3 most important priorities for you related to the practice of medicine, related to, running an office, whatever it is. What are the 3 most important priorities for you in the next month that hit all 3 of those prioritization criteria in that lower right-hand box? On the tool on the left-hand page, right, at the bottom of the left-hand page, we've written those criteria out for you. So I'm not going to ask you to do it now. I'm not going to ask you to think about what are those 3 most important priorities for the next month. But what I am going to teach you and tell you to do in our remaining few minutes for this section is, what do you do with that to-do list? So once you establish your priorities, the goal would then be to go back and look at what you have written on your to-do list. Put a star beside any task that's on that task list that aligns to one of those 3 priorities. If it does not immediately align to one of those 3 priorities, you're not going to put a star beside it. It's that simple. You'd be surprised how many people, when they do this exercise, actually recognize that the work that they're doing every day, how little of it actually aligns to what they know to be the most important thing to be doing. That in and of itself is informative. But then what do you do beyond that? The stuff that you don't put a star beside. It becomes this little, evaluation of, does it have to be done by me? It requires my level of expertise. It requires my level in the organization to do it, but it doesn't have to be done, nor can it be done in the next 30 days. Or it doesn't fit with some key strategic priority. I'm going to defer that till later. I'm going to reserve it for myself, but I'm going to mark it and say, I don't even need to think about doing this right now because I can't advance it in the next 30 days. If it doesn't fit the criteria of having to need to be done by you, requiring your expertise, then the next question is, can I delegate it to somebody? And if so, who is the right person to whom I should delegate? Should it be a member of my office staff? Should it be an extender? Who should it be? And, and when you do that handoff, of course, how do you hand that off appropriately to make sure that they're prepared to be able to do it? Now, the question is, they're so overloaded, I can't delegate to them, right? And so at some point, the strategy is to use that at each level down through, ultimately leading to this last thing that's on the screen, which is eliminating the stuff that has no value for anybody. Like, how many of you, if you go to a meeting, actually get a lot of work done at a meeting? Anybody? What do you really do at meetings? What decisions are really being made at meetings? And what's the structure of meetings? If there was an organization I was at not too long ago in my home state of Pennsylvania, where they were going through they were moving from one electronic health record to a different vendor. So it was a multi-hospital system. And the chief operating officer of that system sent out an email to everybody with an edict and said, for the next 6 months, your priority is to make sure this is a smooth and seamless transition. Take all your routine meetings, stop having them. Like, I keep swearing I'm going to scan this thing and put it up on a screen because it's like a piece of beauty. And he's like, get rid of all this routine stuff that doesn't matter. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's like great. And then he blew it in the last paragraph. You know what he said? After 6 months, once we get this epic implementation done, you can get back to having your meetings and stuff. I thought, if you don't have to have them for 6 months, why do you have to go back and start having them again? You know, and so the biggest opportunity that is here, remember, 41% of the work that we do every day is not required by regulation. It is not required by anybody. It just is, right? And so that's the challenge. And so is to cross things off the list, to actually give yourself capacity to be able to do more and spend more time with the things that do matter. I would tell you that this is not necessarily, always an easy thing to do. What I have found to be most valuable for me and for some other folks that I have talked to is it's really hard sometimes, with stuff that you've written down on a piece of paper, to really think about what can I eliminate. But what we can do and what does work is as we go through our days and we do a certain piece of something or a piece of work, whether that's clinical, whether that's administrative, whatever it is to ask ourselves this simple question. Does this have to be done at all? What would happen if we don't do it? And if the answer to that is yes, we absolutely have to do this, then the next question is, but is it me that has to do it? And then work, with whoever it is that's around you, whether it's inpatient in your office, wherever it happens to be, to try and figure out a better way to be able to get that done so that it not just takes workload off of you, no matter what your role is in this room, but that the most important thing is that it gets work being done at the right level of the organization, whether that's a practice, a hospital, whatever it happens to be. And, in healthcare, it seems like we defy physics, right? It seems like workload flushes upward instead of downward. I would like you to think of all the things that you currently do on a day-to-day basis that do not require your level of expertise. Those are great things to start to think about. You're not going to get here overnight, but what I have found is that if you start to think about this day by day and make a note of that and say, this is something I should do something about, you will start to turn the tide on that. There's a nurse manager in a large academic center in the state of New Jersey that the first time that we ever talked about this, she said, yeah, right, this doesn't work. This is never going to work. I'm never going to do this. And to her credit, she went off and did it. And she did it for 2 days. In her first 2 days of doing what I've just described to you, she saved 90 minutes a day of work that nobody needed, and it was just busy work. It was stuff that didn't need to be done. And then she started to extend that out to some other people within her organization. So the best piece of advice that I could offer is give it a go and see how it works for you. Now, the second piece of this is there's always going to be somebody that's going to come and going to say, can you do this? Can you do that? And this bombardment. The question there has to be, and this is an example of a medical director of oncology. And whenever she's asked to join and do things, she vets those requests against what her current 3 priorities are. And if it is not clear to her that she should be joining this, she starts to ask questions rather than just automatically saying yes. In some cases, if they convince her that they do need at least some of her expertise, what she will do is she will say, okay, yes, I will come, but if I come to the first meeting and or maybe the second meeting and I'm not needed, I am not going to continue to come anymore. And so she puts that on the table. It's not about being subversive. It's about, how do you protect your time in a way, yet give every group the information that they need. Okay? And then we come to the third strategy. So first strategy is instead of being scared and, and worried and fearful of uncertainty, let's embrace that. The second is to think about how can we prioritize our work in a way that gives us the freedom and the room to be able to spend more time doing the work where we can have the greatest impact. This third is a concept called using micro shifts to be able to get macro results. Has anybody ever read this book, What Shamu Taught Me About Life, Love, and Marriage? Or anybody ever heard of author Amy Sutherland? So it's really interesting. Let me give you a little bit of backstory. Amy Sutherland, in this book, Amy Sutherland was doing research and writing a book around exotic animal training. And at the same time she's writing this book, she and her husband are having significant marital issues to the point to where they weren't sure that the marriage was going to last. And they were going to marriage counseling 1 to 2 hours every week. And they had been doing this for months, and it wasn't getting better. And then one day, Amy Sutherland said, what if I use what I found out about exotic animal training on my husband? Listen to this audio clip.
Use in your book is your husband tends to have a short temper when he loses his keys or his wallet, which he does frequently.
Yes.
And that this was ordinarily a source of friction that developed into an argument every single time.
Yeah, and it wasn't that he lost his keys that bothered me that much. It was that he lost his temper over his keys. And I would always engage in this search either by being helpful, or sometimes I would lose my cool and tell him, to calm down. That never works, unfortunately. But the point was that I was always engaging, and when I started thinking like a progressive animal trainer, I realized that I was heaping tons of attention on a behavior I didn't like, which was my husband losing his temper. So I cut it out and quit responding, and it improved dramatically.
You're all going to go home and try this, right? It's interesting, right? I mean, hours and hours and spending lots of money on marriage counseling over an extended period of time, and it's not helping. And so this really starts to set up this third and final point that I wanted to talk about, which is, we sometimes think to make, really big changes, we have to make really big changes to have really big and impactful results. And what this sets up for us is that there are really two divergent approaches in, what Amy and her husband were trying to do to be able to solve their marriage issues. Marriage counseling, carving out hours of time from what are already busy lives. Paying a professional to help moderate and help them plan around improving their marriage. Versus exotic animal training, consistent practice aimed at what are the trigger points that are causing, in this case, Amy to go off the rails at her husband. Reinforcing good behavior with appreciation and attention, right? And so, you've heard this phrase before, small wake, big impact. That's what we're talking about here, is that sometimes we think everything's got to be a big project. Or if we want to create a behavior among, the nurses that are caring for patients on an inpatient caring for inpatients in the hospital, or, whether it's the way the office is running or whatever, we sometimes think it's got to be a big project. When we have the time to be able to step back and think about that, it is often a small change that creates the big impacts that we're looking for. This is the concept of using a micro shift to get a macro result. And we're surrounded by this in our lives, because when you think about personal finance, how many of us are just so used to whipping out plastic, or, now we've got it on our Apple Watch or on our phone or some electronic payment, to be able to tap it onto a device. We don't even have to get the card out of our pocket oftentimes anymore. Yet, we know that that's invisible money, right? The more we do that, the more we spend. Well, what the research says is make a small change in behavior. Pay in cash for something today you would normally put on a card. Maybe it's a Starbucks or whatever it is. Not only do you get an emotional high from passing cash to another person, but you overall across the year spend 12 to 18% less than if you're hauling out plastic all the time. And so, the lesson here is, contrary to what often derails us about driving change, is we don't have to start doing something new. Those opportunities are going to come up naturally. As you think, right, as you do different things that are relatively routine for you every day, start to think about, do I have to do it this way, right? Even if I have to keep doing it, I may not have to do it this way. Is there a more impactful way I can do it by making a small micro shift? Weight loss, right? I could use this one. Substitute sparkling water for a daily soda. I love Coke and Pepsi, right? Lots of empty calories. But if you substitute one sparkling water a day, that translates to just that one behavior, 15-pound weight loss in a year. And so the message here is minimal additional effort is required in any given situation to make a micro shift happen. And then athletic training, we talk about doing extended workouts and long aerobic workouts, but yet, what the research is showing, shorter bursts, of energy and training actually can help oxygen uptake by muscles and increase endurance. And so if the message is if you miss one opportunity, during this workout today, there's another workout tomorrow. The big message here is make a small change in your default approach, to a common situation. So with that to-do list that we talked about a few minutes ago, as you go through doing very common things every day, and you say, I can't eliminate it, I can't defer it, it's got to be me that does it, you can always start to think about, is there a better way to be able to do this? Now, we have, and this is in your workbook, but we have given you and designed 8 micro shifts that we know will create larger results. Now, I'm not going to stand here and read all this to you, but for example, 90-second storytelling. Maybe that is helpful in terms of, maybe helping to align, nurses on the inpatient side or in your office or your office staff who are caring for a patient. Where you tell a story of how there was a good outcome because of a certain result. How do you make something go viral? How do you pass it on? How do you keep yourself open to hearing the feedback that you need to have? So there are multiple different kinds of micro shifts we can talk about here. I've often found these work really, really well around meetings, around routine kinds of interactions. And in the lower right-hand corner of this box, we have given you the instructions. You can design your own micro shift. And so if from the very beginning of what I've been talking about here today, we don't have to keep doing it the same. There is that opportunity to change. There is that opportunity to become more efficient. Now, I've given you a second tool that says once you decide and find an opportunity or think of a micro shift that you would like to put into play, then think about where you're going to do it. I don't care if you ever write anything on any of these pieces of paper. But I wanted to give you the tools, if for no other reason, that you would have a thought process to go through, as you think about this. And so to consistently apply it. It is going to be easier for us to stay caught in the way we've been doing it forever versus making a change, even if it's just a micro shift, if we don't consciously think about it. Okay? So I will leave that for your later review. So three big recommendations. The first, build it into your schedule. Because we are creatures of habit, because we love box, circle, it's always going to take more time to do something new because we have to consciously think about it. We haven't hardwired it. We've all heard of Abraham Maslow. Abraham Maslow not only had a lot to say about the psychology of motivation, but Maslow did an incredible amount of work around how we learn as human beings. And he said there are 4 stages that we have to pass through, and we have to pass through them one at a time until it becomes hardwired behavior. There are no shortcuts. And the first stage of learning is it's unconscious incompetence. I don't know what I don't know. Think of Rumsfeld. You know, there are things that we don't even know. But then we become consciously incompetent. We become aware of something that we don't know. But we still don't know what to do about it. So we learn, we take a class, we read a journal article, you know, we do something, somebody mentors us through it, and we now know all the steps to go through, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which gets us to conscious competence. I now know what to do. That's unfortunately where most of our learning stops. We never make that last climb, which is practice and application, practice and application, practice and application, to get us up to unconscious competence, where we have replaced one previously less than perfect behavior with a new behavior. But that does take time. So the more that we can consciously think about it, put it into our schedule, and learn through repetition, the more likely we are to create more sustainable work habits, no matter what our role is in life over time. You know, and then finally we can go public, right? I mean, when you find something good, share it with everybody else so that they too have the opportunity to take advantage of it as well. So my time was until 9:50. I'm at exactly 9:49 by my watch. How's that for wrapping up? Thanks a lot for letting me be here at LUGPA today. I really appreciate it. I hope that you've got a couple of tactics to take with you. The biggest piece of encouragement that I could give you is give it a whirl. You know, I mean, what do you got to lose? And maybe you'll just find, you know, a way to be able to put a little bit of joy and energy back in what I know are incredibly crazy lives. Have a great rest of the day today. Safe travels home to all of you that are traveling. I'll be here, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Have a great rest of the day.